And before I speak, I should caution you, do not panic. It paused for a moment, and when it finally spoke, its response was stern, almost stoic in its reply. The you as you know yourself has already ceased to exist. There was silence. When Naruto didn't vanish from existence, a low growl left his lips. You want to run that by me again, buddy? Silence. The Reaper reprimanded, its tone strident. By altering your DNA, you no longer exist as Uzumaki Naruto. Rather, you are an Uchiha. You already know this. What you do not know is thus, all traces of your former self were eradicated the moment I first laid my power upon you in limbo. Naruto blanched. He didn't like where this conversation was going. Please tell me that doesn't mean what I think it means. Shinigami nodded. The old you may yet still be born in this timeline, but any effect his existence might have had upon you has been nullified, my emissary. At Naruto's continued silence, the Grim sighed. Perhaps I am over-explaining. Allow me to simplify. Say something foul were to befall Uzumaki Kushina, that she were to die, say, at the hands of an enemy shinobi. Were that to happen, even were your mother to perish, and those last traces of your old self eradicated, the you as you now know yourself would still continue on. To exist. Do you understand? He could feel a headache coming on, but the Uzumaki Uchiha nodded anyway. Just what the hell did you do to me? Naruto hissed. Not just my face, not just my DNA, but even my destiny. I barely recognize myself anymore. I made a wager against fate, I believe you mortals call it a gamble. The Reaper chortled then, it was a deep throaty sound. You truly are a unique existence. Your mind and your memories belong to you still, but should another try to pry into those memories, and I suspect the fools of this era soon will, they will see what the you of this time has seen, false memories indistinguishable from a true experience, bequeathed to that body you now possess. You may wish to thank me for this gift. But know this. Those golden eyes seemed to brighten at that moment, glowing with eerie intent as the death god loomed closer, its breath cold as ice upon his face. You must keep who you truly are, a secret. I shudder to think what might happen if the timeline comes unraveled any more than it already has. Are you sure I can't just kill myself and be done with it? The blonde growled, placing a hand to his now throbbing temple. It's beginning to sound a hell of a lot more simple. You will not. The Shinigami's voice was like a thunderclap in his ears. I have not bargained my very being on this gamble only to have you end your life a second time. Alright. Naruto sighed. Loosen up and take a joke, will ya, Reaper? I do not loosen up in my business. It replied. Now, you are going to be questioned. Interrogated. No, really. His deadpan was barely concealed. Silence. Shinigami snapped back. Now, listen well. This is what you are going to say. Naruto gulped as the Shinigami finished its explanation. That had to be the most fucked up lie ever. You do realize I'm flying by the seat of my pants here, right? I am well aware. The Reaper retorted as the colors of the world began to return, the flow of time moving inexorably ever onward. And I trust you to succeed. Before he could reply, the Shinigami was gone, leaving him alone with his escort. Thankfully, neither seemed to have noticed the little time lapse. One of them shoved him towards the doors a tad too roughly, snickering as the blonde stumbled toward the office. He did his best to push all thoughts of revenge from his mind, refusing to show weakness in the face of these fools. Here goes nothing. Naruto tapped softly on the door with his fist and announced his presence. Come in. Tears nearly sprang to his eyes. Upon entering, he found himself staring at a pair of familiar faces, lacking the liver spots of old age as well as stark gray hair, and another which he immediately recognized and gravitated towards. He would have recognized her anyway even without the attire, and, even so, he knew those eyes, that hair, that bust, just about anywhere. Even so, his jaw nearly dropped to the floor. Bachan? What did you just call me, punk? The young woman couldn't be more than 20, maybe 25, bristled angrily at his remark. Naruto had just enough time to register the remark before she cannoned forward, fingers clenched into a fist. Less than a day ago, that punch would have hit him. Now. His Uchiha blood sang at the sight of her attack, at the sound of battle. She seemed to slow in his peripheral vision, as though she were moving underwater. He wasn't quite sure when he mouthed her how, for that matteringly that he did, drifting forwards even as the door shattered to timbers behind his back. Kami, but she was so slow. Or was he simply faster now? Boy. Whatever the case, she proved no match for him. His fingers locked around her wrist in a vice and gave a sharp twist, breaking the bone like a twig. Snick. She gasped in pained surprise, but Naruto was still moving, sweeping her legs out from beneath, forcing her to the floor with a strength he didn't know he had. Even as she tried to struggle, his fingers found her throat. Tsunade froze, eyes bulging. Because this was Tsunade, younger than he remembered her. This was the past after Albert, still the future fifth Hokage nonetheless. And he'd just beaten her in unarmed combat. It all happened so swiftly. Ah. Realizing his mistake, he swiftly jerked backwards, leaving a baffled Tsunade gawking up at him. My apologies. I tend to react like that when someone attacks me. Sorry about calling you that too, he continued, at the murderous glint in her gaze. Must have mistaken you for someone else. He held out a hand for her and slowly, warily, she accepted it. I certainly hope so, Tsunade said with eerie calm as she pressed a hand to her broken wrist, livid honey eyes bored into her future successor. Because whoever you are, if you ever say that to me again. No, no. Naruto waved his hands rapidly and performed a perfunctory bow. It was a mistake. My bad. If you're quite done haranguing him, Tsunade, Sarutobi's gravely voice interjected, I'd like to speak with our guest. Alone. But sensei. Dismissed. Tsunade looked as though she might say something else, might protest for a final time, but in the end, she resigned herself to a silent retreating to her battered arm as she departed. Naruto turned to regard the Hokage as his fellow blonde gave them their silence. He was acting rather strange. Funny, he didn't remember the old man being quite this stern back in the day. The thought brought a frown to his lips. Has he made yet another mistake already? You're Sarutobi Hiruzen, right? You would be correct. The Sandaime replied, steepling his fingers together. The problem remains, however, that I do not know who you are. Let us begin with what we do know, then. His aging face seemed to tense as Naruto looked on, his old eyes turning harsh and stern. First, you retrieved Uzumaki Kushina from enemy forces at great peril to yourself and returned her to this village, safe and sound. For this, you have my most sincere gratitude. Second, for some reason or another you're impersonating a Konoha shinobi because I've never seen you before in my life. Third, judging by your appearance and that little stunt you just pulled back there with my student, you are undoubtedly an Uchiha, which also strikes me as strange because, for lack of a better term, you don't seem to have that proverbial stick up your ass. Have I missed anything? Nope. Naruto had to forcibly sink teeth into his lower lip to keep himself laughing at the end. I think you've just about covered everything and anything. Not quite. Sarutobi fixed him with a steely gaze. There is still the matter of who you are and what you want. Now, because you've chosen to be courteous to me, I shall extend the same courtesy to you. I will ask you one final time. Who are you? Naruto dithered a moment longer, wondering just how much he ought to reveal. He'd already altered events by saving his mother, who was to say what would happen if he revealed he was from the future. Slowly he opened his eyes, letting the gathered teardrops run down the side of his face towards his ears. Just what the hell was he going to do? Even if they did believe his story, there was no way in hell they'd accept his change in appearance. At the least, they'd throw him in a mental hospital. At worst, they'd condemn him to death. The Shinigami's explanation rang through his mind once more. This is what you are going to say. He felt his eyes begin to burn again. He knew what answer he had to give. Do you know the name Uchiha Madara? There was silence. When the third next spoke, there was an audible edge to his words. Surely you're not claiming to be DSH. Naruto snorted and waved the Sandaime's concerns aside. There could be no taking his words back now, the only way out was forward. Of course I'm not Madara. I'd have to be like 100 years old. Much to his own consternation he steeled himself, drew a deep breath and continued the lie, continued to weave this fine, delicate tapestry of falsehood. I'm his descendant. What? Did I stutter? Naruto forced a touch of arrogance into his voice, easy enough when you knew someone like Sasuke and watched the words work their magic. Uchiha Madara is my grandfather. I am of his blood. Must I demonstrate myself further? Sarutobi paled and promptly crossed himself. Twice. Naruto watched a myriad of emotions flicker across his face. A descendant of that man, standing here before them. Now that he looked, the man did bear a passing resemblance to the legendary Uchiha. But no. That couldn't be possible. Madara didn't have any descendants unless he'd fathered a child before being slain by Hashirama and the Valley of End. And if he had, if such a child had grown and produced yet another child. He slammed the lid shut on that train of thought before it could consume him. I'm afraid I'll need more proof than your word. See is believing, after all. Naruto sighed and released chakra into his coal-black eyes, awakening the bloodline bestowed upon him. Sarutobi stiffened as the Sharingan abruptly emerged, its triple tomo swirling fiercely angrily in each eye. Naruto bit back a grimace of his own once he beheld his reflection in the Sandaime's slate-gray stare. Madara's eyes were still evolving. Rapidly. Would he unlock the Mangekyo at this rate and lose his eyesight before he could accomplish his goal? He hoped not. Those eyes. Hiruzen visibly swallowed, as though he'd seen something in them Naruto had not. To see. Gathering himself up with an effort, he forced himself back to the table once more. Why have you come here then, after all this time? Surely you could have left Kushina at the Gatemine. At Naruto's thunderous expression he was quick to amend himself, you must have had a life outside these walls. My father recently passed on. Another lie. But before he did, he told me that all Uchiha were welcome here, and as I found myself growing lonely, I decided to stay. Is that a problem? Not at all. Saratobi seemed to welcome this change of topic with open arms. If you wish to come into the Hidden Leaf, that can be arranged. But onto other matters. Where did you get the headband? He asked. This. Naruto pretended to consider this for a moment. It was passed down to me. A trophy of sorts. I'll have to have someone validate that. A small smile etched across his visage, like a crack scrawling across stone. But if you're telling the truth, I'd be more than willing to welcome you into our village. He rose out of his chair and pulled up a seat. You may wish to make yourself comfortable then, stranger. You may be here quite a while. My name is Naruto. At last he thought to himself, some truth. Naruto, then. Saratobi confirmed. I'll have someone come by to collect you shortly. As you wish. Naruto replied slowly, choosing his words with the utmost of care. Send a Yamanaka to pick my brain. I have nothing to hide. Some hours later, Naruto chewed on his bottom lip as he wandered through the streets of Konoha. It had been a long time since he had been able to walk through the village like this, especially since it had first been destroyed back when he was 16. They had done a very good job rebuilding it, but it just hadn't been the same. Especially once it was destroyed the second time. Another thing that had slightly unnerved him at first was seeing so many Uchiha. He hadn't gotten around to figuring out how he would prevent the massacre yet, but it would still be years before that would happen, at the very least. On the other hand, that made it of utmost importance that he try to convince the Hokage to get the Uchiha to merge with the village, more than they currently were, lest they risk alienating themselves even further in the future. And then there was the matter of Tobi and Uchiha Madara, not to mention. Ouch. Naruto touched a hand to his head and fought to keep from cringing. His head was still throbbing, a side effect of having his memories so thoroughly inspected. As the Shinigami had said, what was seen were not the memories of Uzumaki Naruto, but Uchiha Naruto. Who would have thought the god of death could do such a thing? Not him. It still riled him to be seen as an Uchiha when at least on the incident remained in Uzumaki. By Kami this was going to take some getting used to. Humming as he walked along, he got the occasional glance from villagers, some of whom would give him a small nod of acknowledgement and maybe a smile before continuing on with their business. At first many of them Uchiha scolded him, likely due to their inherent suspicion of Uchiha Madara. Now that he'd claimed to be the man's descendant, it was only natural that suspicion abounded. Yet another big difference: previously he was either completely ignored or treated like a celebrity, especially after Pain's attack. This right now was a happy, if not nice, medium. I guess I could get used to this. He rubbed at an itch on his arm, not used to having them sheathed in long sleeves like they currently were. The Hokage had gotten him a small apartment to use and a few sets of standard clothing, along with a few sleeveless vests and the standard jacket. The outfit was similar to that which most Anbu wore, but he currently didn't have a mask or guards. That lofty station was well beyond his reach at present. After all, he'd only just been allowed into the village after the Hokage revealed him to half the damn populace, and he was fairly certain his goals didn't include joining the infamous Black Ops anytime soon. As for now, he'd be more than happy with a warm meal of ramen. The scent of it caught his nose, causing his head to snap back around. He spun about, seeking its source. There, standing in all its early glory, Ichiraku ramen. One miso ramen, please. It was all he could do to keep a grin from his face as he rushed inside and took a seat. All his strength was focused on preventing his knees from knocking together as he awaited his long-favored treat. The chef took his order and ducked back behind the curtain, leaving the Uzumaki Uchiha to wait impatiently for his food. Seconds passed. Then minutes. Finally, just as he was about to check on him, a voice prickled at his ear. Well, hello there, handsome. Naruto opened his eyes and turned in the direction where the voice had come from, only to come face to face with possibly the most gorgeous girl he'd ever seen. He found himself peering into the coal-black eyes of another Uchiha, a lithe beauty with long, lustrous black hair and a body that, despite being clad in Konohagakure fatigaswaldov, made even Tsunade Bachin green with envy. She smiled warmly as she strode to meet him, claiming the seat opposite him on the bar without so much as an invitation. There was a cool, aloof air about her, as though she existed solely to strike fear into the heart of others. He could appreciate it in a woman, but there was something about this one that instantly put him on guard. Dangerous. Have we met? Naruto failed to bite back that inquiry before it could leave his lips. While he didn't know her, from her gaze, it was obvious the woman knew him. No, we haven't. Kunoichi replied. But I'm sure Kushina's told you all about me. I'm Mikoto. She continued, pausing, peering at him. I honestly have no idea who you are. Naruto shook his head. Did he? She rolled her shoulders. Father won't like that. But thanks for being polite, for whatever it's worth. That aside, I understand I have you to thank for saving my best friend earlier. Naruto almost barked out a laugh before he realized the repercussions of his actions. Instead of Minato saving his mother this time around, he'd been the one to do it. His actions weren't helping his case any. He had to calm down and think things through rationally from here on out. The slightest action could have untold repercussions in the future. As a matter of fact, Makoto. A male voice exclaimed, cutting him off. There you are. The smile shattered on Makoto's face like so much glass. Before Naruto could protest, she looped an arm in his and drew dangerously close to him, bosom pressing into his arm. While he himself was no stranger to intimacy, he still felt a flush rise in his cheeks as she did this to him. He was, after all, only human. And those breasts pressing against him. Play along. She hissed in his ear, mere moments before a stern-looking man appeared via. Once again, Naruto felt that faint sense of déjà vu. He'd seen this man somewhere before. But where? What is the meaning of this, Mikoto? The man demanded. What are you doing? What does it look like I'm doing, Fugaku? She smiled, scooting closer to Naruto. I thought I'd introduce myself to our long-lost clansman. Naruto nearly dropped his chopsticks, he knew that name. In his youth before the massacre, he'd gotten into enough trouble to learn it well, having often found himself before the man's desk to be brought to the clan's circle justice for his pranks. Just as he knew this man would someday be the father of Sasuke and Itachi. His left hand twitched with a sudden desire to kill this man. After what Sasuke had done, he'd be doing a world of good by ending his father's life. This fool. Fugaku scoffed, scowling at Naruto. He's no kin of ours, regardless of what Lord Hokage says. Anyone with dark hair and black eyes can waltz in here and claim to be one of us. But what proof does he have, I wonder? For all we know, he could be an enemy spy. Snick. He blinked in surprise as a thin red line opened across his cheek, spilling crimson down his collar. Naruto retracted his hand back onto the counter, having been the one to throw the knife with deadly accuracy. His eyes narrowed upon Fugaku. His Sharingan must have activated somehow, because the man visibly flinched when he met his gaze. Care to run that by me again? He hissed. You don't frighten me, outsider. The Uchiha snapped back. A Noctis like you is nothing. Noctis? Is that so? Naruto quipped, detaching himself from Mikoto, swiveling to face the man. Then why does it look like you're about to piss your pants? He had the succinct satisfaction of hearing Mikoto's laughter. Did that sound bring such perverse pleasure to him anyway, and his grin only grew as he beheld his adversary's reaction. Fugaku's face flared 5 different shades of red. I dare. Oh, I dare. The former blonde was rising from his stool now, raiment completely forgotten in the wake of his anger. What are you going to do about it, little man? Ah. The sweet irony of it all. As an adult, Naruto was a good head and shoulders taller than Fugaku, towering over him like a giant. To think he'd once feared this man in his youth. There was nothing he could do to hurt him now, he was invincible. Untouchable. And if this belligerent fool thought he stood a chance in hell, he'd probably try and. Training Ground 7. The words were little more than a snarl. This evening. With Mikado-sama as my witness, I will prove just how worthless you are before the clan worm. I'm shaking in my sandals. Naruto growled, knowing the man had just made a fatal mistake. But to another word, Fugaku rounded on his heel and vanished. Kami, I am so sick of him. Mikoto groaned the moment he was out of earshot. All he does is prattle on and pretend like a complete idiot. The clan this, the clan that. He's not even the heir and he goes on about it more than I do, for God's sake. Sighing, she pressed her head to the counter, as though she could somehow bury her woes there. He is an ass, isn't he? Naruto muttered into his drink. Just like Sasuke, he added to himself. Mikoto shook her head at that, raven tresses swaying from side to side. That's not it. I'm the representative of the whole clan. If the clan is in a bad position, I must protect it. I'm an only child and my father isn't getting any younger. So the job of looking after the clan must be left to me. My father is the supervisor of that job, so that's probably why he pays so much attention to me. But with conversations between us alone. Today, when Itausen spoke with me, he spoke of you and what you did for Kushina. You were bold. Reckless. Not a thing like Fugaku, not even in the slightest. And because of that. I think he's a bit jealous of you, frankly. Me? Makoto nodded. The long-lost descendant of Uchiha Madara. Who wouldn't be jealous of you? She nudged him playfully with her shoulder. So? Are you going to accept his challenge? Naruto's frown flipped itself upside down. You bet your pretty little ass I am. Her onyx gaze pinioned him. You know. It's a good thing you're cute. His grin was positively beatific. I will try. That evening, are you prepared, fool? Hi, I'm quite ready to kick your ass. Fugaku's expression turned murderous. You worm. Naruto stifled a yawn as his sockled rival spewed yet another vitriolic retort. This was getting old. When were they going to start? The sun was just beginning to settle in for the evening, casting their grounds in 7 shades of flame. An unbidden breeze blew through his tattered black locks, stirring the dead leaves at his feet and wiping them up into a frenzy. He watched them blow away, fluttering across the horizon until even his newfound eyes could no longer track them. Reluctantly, he allowed his sight to track across the remainder of the clearing. Fugaku had been good on his word. There were at least several dozen clan members crowded into the training grounds, each eager to see him succeed. Or fail. The latter wouldn't happen. He didn't recognize any of them. But then again, he'd only ever really known Sasuke and Itachi. Makoto, as heir to the clan, stood at the forefront with her father, a large grizzled old man who looked as though he'd seen more than his fair share of missions in his time. But it was the former who stepped forward, taking her place between them. She looked positively regal in her kimono fabric, a dark shade of dusk almost, as if she were in mourning. Her visage was anything but. She seemed almost pleased. Uchiha Naruto. When she spoke her tone was solemn, bordering on reverent. Fugaku has challenged your claim as Uchiha. Do you accept this challenge? Naruto grinned. Hell yes. He was going to enjoy this. A slight smile lifted her lips. Very well. Nodding, she turned to face the latter. Uchiha Fugaku. Do you swear by the clan to fight with all your hi? He cut her off mid-sentence, already inhaling. Makoto scowled and took a sharp step backwards, returning to her father's side. Then. Begin. Pain. Fugaku snarled, expelling a great stream of flame. Tikaku no Jutsu. Naruto scoffed and made to move, instead he balked as the stream of fire gushed toward him. Couldn't he move? Why? Unbidden the memory was there, hand signs and all. Naruto reeled as a wealth of information flooded his mind. It was as if every jutsu Madara had ever seen, ever mastered, was now his own. And he knew just which one to use. Steeling himself, he drew in a deep breath, kneading the chakra in his stomach, giving it shape and form. If one wanted to extinguish a flame, they need only give rise to an even more powerful inferno, by which they might overwhelm and extinguish it. Fugaku must have sensed the sudden upswing of chakra, because his eyes bulged. That's pain. Naruto spat, grinning from ear to ear. Goku Mikyaku. He exhaled mightily, expelling all the chakra he'd been stoking in his lungs. The great fireball found itself snuffed out, easily extinguished before the rising inferno as it roiled forward. Into Fugaku. The elder Uchiha had just enough time to realize his folly before the blaze overtook his position, swallowing him whole. No. His mind railed against the sudden turnabout, fought the realization, the knowledge that he had more than severely underestimated this newcomer, this descendant of Uchiha Madara. Pain. Fugaku's last sight was of the torrent of flame rushing towards him. His last smell that of charred flesh, his own flesh. Then the black of unconsciousness took him. Cause and effect. Well, can't say I didn't see this coming. These were Naruto's next words, accidentally spoken aloud as the clan carted away the charred corpse that had once belonged to the great, now very late Uchiha Fugaku. And even if he was somehow wrong, if by some miracle the pile of smoking flesh wasn't a corpse, the man would likely never be a shinobi again. The Goku Mikyaku had done massive damage not just to the clearing, but to the buffoon's body. The arrogant Uchiha had been left sporting massive third-degree burns, one of his hands had all but burned to ash in the massive explosion. Not that he felt sorry for him, mind you. Far from it. He was simply in awe of his own power. It was hard to believe that a single fire technique, even one of Madara's, had done such a good job at wiping that smug smile off that prick's face. If Kurama was still with him, he was certain the old fox would be laughing all 9 of his tails off. Even now, fire crews were still working to put out the blaze with water. Those few who had remained of the Uchiha gazed upon him with varying emotions of respect, awe, and in some cases even fear. As much as he might loathe to admit it, he'd just established a respected place for himself in the clan. And quite possibly changed the future. As he tried to contain his trepidation at continuously changing the future, Makoto sidled up to him, appearing visibly pleased with the end result. Well done. She said, indicating the charred terrain within a glance. I wasn't aware you knew such an excellent technique, as expected of Madara's descendant. Her finger trailed across his cheek before he could think to stop it, tracing thin lines across his cheek where his whiskers once dwelt and pulling his face towards her own. You know. But next she spoke, her lips brushed his outer ear, words warmer than her breath. I do believe I'm starting to fall for you more and more, Naruto-kun. She took him by the arm and began to lead him away from the others, deeper into the grounds. Odd. So how did it feel, obliterating him with a single move? She asked at length. Don't lie, I saw your face back there, you enjoyed it. The former Uzumaki opened his mouth to say a reply. And promptly snapped it shut as she stepped away, awaiting his reply. Suur. Alright, Naruto, just roll with it. It was easy. He feigned a small smile and typical Uchiha arrogance. After all those years spent around Sasuke, it wasn't that hard. The fool wasn't even worthy of facing me. Truth be told, it was the great destroyer of flame was the only fire jutsu that held any sort of real significance to him. Madara had used it to nearly wipe out the Shinobi Alliance multiple times during the war. It was only fitting that he use it for the Usa toward the greater good that to end their duel swiftly. He felt a brief pang of sorrow, suddenly realizing he just might have ended Itachi's existence before it had ever begun. But that was what this was about now. Wasn't it? He was here to change this. Some of those changes might not be pleasant. And some of them might. The voice didn't belong to Kurama, he elicited it was his own subconscious, a whisper of desire as he glanced at the woman beside him, refusing to be denied. There was certainly something alluring about Uchiha Mikoto, she was bold, beautiful, and if her lips on his ear and her words were any suggestion, she was obviously attracted to him. He was no stranger to the female form. But what to do? Decisions. The old man had informed him that he wouldn't be able to accept missions for at least a week while he was instituted as a citizen of Konoha, and it wasn't as though he'd be able to change anything just by sitting on his hands until such a time, so. Which reminds me, Naruto-kun. I have a favor to ask. You want to fight me? Naruto cocked his head aside as Mikoto finished her explanation, restraining a pained grimace as his raven locks threatened to blot out his vision once again. Kami was alive, but he wasn't used to having this much hair. He'd have to cut it soon, perhaps into his old hairstyle. Maintaining it in its present form was absolutely out of the question, eerie resemblance to Uchiha Madara aside, he didn't necessarily enjoy being reminded of those old memories, the images of the madman cutting his friends and family down were still too fresh to endure. Mikoto nodded, mistaking his silence for affirmation. Just a simple spar. No ninjutsu, or only our Sharingan. Perhaps some kunai. I wish to see how your skill compares to mine. Once more, the time-traveling shinobi had to pause to consider the ramifications of his actions. Something about the way she'd said spar set off alarm bells in his head, surely she couldn't be serious. After seeing what he'd done to Fugaku, she wanted to face him herself. You'll have to forgive my lack of enthusiasm. Granted. She replied, raising her arms and settling into a stance. You don't strike me as the type to hurt someone without cause, I like that. So, why don't we sweeten the deal? That caught Naruto flat-footed, once again, and for the first time since meeting with Hiruzen here in the past, he was truly at a loss for words. I beg your pardon. Mikoto's smile sent shivers down his spine. Say, if I win. You'll spend the remainder of the day with me, you'll spend the night in my quarters and do whatever I ask until sunrise. Oi. And if I win? The heiress's grin seemed to falter for an instant, as though she hadn't considered the possibility of her defeat. Then I'll be yours to do with as you please for the evening. Just like that. Naruto's deadpan was barely concealed. He didn't believe her for an instant, but something inside him stirred at the challenge. If I didn't know better, I'd say you're trying to get me in bed. Figure that out on your own, did you? Look, we barely even know each other. What's to know? Mikoto countered, folding both arms before her insubstantial bosom. I find you attractive. Don't you feel the same? It has nothing to do with whether you're related to Madara or not, I could care less about that. However, what I do care about is your strength. You proved your power against Fugaku back there. You were obviously more than a match for most of our clan, I dare say you'd even beat my father, and he's the clan head. As his heir, I wish to see your true capabilities firsthand for myself. You do understand that, I trust. Yes, Naruto chose his words carefully, but I still fail to see why you want me so badly. In the face of his silence, she smiled. It seems forward, I know, but I have always known what I've wanted in life, ever since I was a little girl. Someone strong. A man who doesn't piss or preen over tradition. Someone willing to stand up for himself and what he believes in. She turned aside then, her eyes downcast. Until you came along, I was beginning to lose hope. I'd never thought I would find someone like that. Unfortunately for you, and here she did raise her gaze, eyes bright and determined. You've come into my life at the worst possible time and done exactly what I had hoped to turn my entire clan on his head. I expect you to take responsibility for what you've done. And then, just as swiftly as her Sharingan had shown itself, so did it fade, those charcoal orbs unexpectedly softening. Do you not find me attractive? She asked, tucking an arm around her waist whilst she spoke. As a fellow Uchiha. Oh dear God, she's adorable. Naruto felt a trickle of blood trickle down his nose and promptly slapped himself. Just who the hell was he staring at here? Itachi's mom, Itachi's mom, Itachi's mom. I have to calm down before I go and do something stupid. And yet. His mind was screaming at him, telling him that this was the woman responsible for giving birth to Itachi and Sasuke. By all rights they might not exist now after what he'd done to Fugaku, but a small part of him cried foul at the thought of eradicating Itachi from existence. He tried to shut down all thoughts of mutual attraction from his mind, but to no avail. They clung like a stain to his brain, resisting all attempts to be scrubbed off and clean. And as such, he wasn't quite ruining the next words that emerged from his mouth. Well, you're certainly not unattractive. Jeh. These Uchiha really spoke their minds, didn't they? She wasn't anything like Itachi or Sasuke. Nothing at all. He didn't remember either of them being like. Well, this. He was swiftly losing himself, Naruto was, and their spar had yet to even begin. Well, when you put it that way, begin. She dove at him, her body a lithe blur, ebony tresses streaming out behind her as she threw the first punch. His new eyes saw it coming a mile away. What they didn't see was her hand emerging from the pouch at her back. Blow had been a feint. Naruto's head snapped to the right, his mouth snapping shut with a harsh click as something screamed towards his face at breakneck speed. He felt something catch between his teeth, and only then did he realize he'd caught a kunai between his teeth. Makoto gave him no time to try and process his small victory, however, her hand scything towards his neck in a devastating arc that, if successful, would surely leave an awful bruise if it connected. He'd learned since a young age to underestimate the strength of an Uchiha, certainly not one in her prime. But his head arched backward, taking the kunai between his teeth and shooting it back at her with the sheer force of his tongue alone. A thin slice opened upon the older Uchiha's cheek, earning him the briefest of surprised snarls. His hand snared her wrist in a vicious vise, biting down with enough force to shatter bone. This same technique had broken Tsunade's wrist hours before. Makoto didn't even flinch. Naruto saw a 10th chakra circling in her veins, strengthening her body, granting her resilience momentarily surpassing his own strength. Not bad. She conceded. But, he challenged. But I can do better. Makoto scissored her legs beneath him, depriving both of their balance. The Uzumaki Uchiha had a heartbeat to realize just how much he was beginning to enjoy their little spar before that old instinct of his kicked in, sending his new body whirling into action. Sharingan eyes flared, he saw her heel come sweeping towards him an instant before Makoto began the motion. In the blink of an eye, he launched himself upright, planting his knee into her stomach. He braced himself then, readying for the counterattack. That never came. Makoto crumpled like a sack of potatoes, her body flopping like a wet noodle to the ground. Oh crap. He'd underestimated his strength. Just what kind of awful power dwelt in this new body of his to fell someone with a single blow. Stooping to a knee, he began to check for a pulse, silently fearing the worst. He hadn't killed her, had he? A harsh cough from Makoto swiftly disabused him of such a notion. She was still breathing though stunned by the blow to her stomach all the same. Sorry. Naruto murmured. Guess I don't know my own strength. Impressive. She gasped up at him. Your strength exceeds everything I thought it would be. Truly. As promised, nope. What? I said no. Naruto felt he might be making the biggest blunder of his life, but still, he shook his head. Don't force yourself for the sake of your clan. I detest that. More than anything, he hated it when people were lying to themselves. He wanted no part of this if the heiress didn't truly want him. And for a moment, he thought he'd been right. Makoto stared up at him for a long moment, her dark eyes disbelieving, her expression torn somewhere between anger and amused ire, as though she found this whole speech of his incredibly funny. A joke, even. Then she straightened, albeit with some effort, refusing all attempts at assistance. Whoever said I was forcing anything, fool. Her hands closed around his visage and drew him forward, their faces now centimeters apart. I wasn't lying when I said I wanted you. Huh? Makoto looked like she was going to say something else, but she didn't. Instead she smiled, leaned up, and kissed him. Naruto shivered, a small tremor of desire coursing up his spine. But desire wasn't enough to hold him to Makoto, no matter how much lust he might feel in that regard. It took a great deal of effort to break away, but he did just that, gasping slightly. We can't do this. He argued as she tugged him out of the sunlight and into the trees, but the words were without rancor. Oh, I think we can. She reached up, trailing her finger through his hair, stroking his scalp through the sea of ebony tresses. In fact, we're going to. Right here. Right now. There was just something about the way she said those words that stripped away his self-control. Gazing down at her, her eyes half-lidded, her fingers exploring every inch of him told Naruto all he needed to know. He'd been wrong. Makoto wasn't being forced into anything, she was doing this. There was absolutely nothing flitting across his frame. No, you don't understand. He was cut off as her mouth struck his, her lips connecting with his ferociously, her tongue probing against his. That did it. The last bastion of his self-control crumbled. Consequences? You're sending me where? I've already explained this twice to you, Naruto. Sarutobi's death was barely concealed. Do you honestly expect a third? Yeah, because it'd make me feel all warm and cozy inside. Naruto's deadpan was barely concealed. Endearing though he might have been with the Sandaime during his youth, it was a man, not a boy, who gazed upon the third now, through eyes unfettered by admiration and endearment. For as long as he could remember he'd wanted to wear that hat, sit in that seat. Losing a war had changed that. There were burdens with being in command, impossible decisions that no man should have to break. Some broke under the pressure. Others bowed to it and let it pass them by. And still others bore up under the weight of that horrible burden, carrying it stoically all those days. To this day, he still wasn't entirely sure which of those three Sarutobi Hiruzen had turned out to be. Granted, he understood exactly what the privileges, responsibilities of the office entailed, including authoritative process, and quite frankly, thought his first and possibly last assignment was complete bullshit. To send an integrated shinobi out into the field so soon was just asking for trouble. Especially if that ninja was in Uchiha still galled him to say that supposedly descended from Madara himself. Very well. But this is the last time. Whatever you say, Hikage-sama. God, it was so weird to say that. The Sandaime sighed, the sound of a leader old and worn. And yet he seemed oddly relaxed. Peaceful, even. Naruto couldn't tell, he'd never been good at reading the old man's moods when he was younger. Even with all these years of experience behind him, he still couldn't tell whether the old man he would always be seen that way in his eyes was pleased or pissed with him. Hell, that expression of his remained entirely the same as that day. Not the day he'd been slain. Naruto nearly blanked up right then and there, dear Kami alive, how was he going to prevent that? Granted the time of Hirazen's death would not be for many, many years till now, but just the thought itself was enough to give him chills. That's right, he mused, Obito and Madara aren't the only threats here. I've got to worry about him as well. What a pain. If left unchecked, Orochimaru would leave the village and torment thousands of innocent souls. Not to mention all those he would kill. I won't let that happen, either. He reminded himself, forcibly wrestling his mind back to the present as the Hokage finished his explanation. In short, you'll be part of a joint envoy to Sunagakur. Hiruzen explained for the third and final time. They've recently sighted Iwagakure scouts on their borders, and tensions are high throughout the nation. As they are one of our only allies at present, I cannot stress the importance of this. They lack our military might, but many talented shinobi have recently come under their banner. He fixed Naruto with a pointed gaze, leaving the blonde wondering just what he'd meant by that. Is he implying I'd be better off there? What? Naruto blinked. It's nothing. Sarutobi waved his question away with his hand. It is just difficult to reconcile your actions with that of your ancestors given the resemblance. So that's what it was. Wait, that was the absolute last thing he wanted. As things stood, I have got to get this cut. He growled, touching a hand to his spiky mane. I don't want anyone comparing me to him. And why not? Because I'm my own man. The Uchiha found himself glowering in more ways than one as he lowered his arm. I don't want to share the present with some bloody ancestor. Well said. Now, as I was saying, you'll be departing tomorrow at daybreak for the sake of renewing our truce. This time, Naruto couldn't quite hold back his groan. Is there a problem? Need I remind you that I've only been here for 2 days? His voice held just a hint of exasperation when he spoke, a note of annoyance at his careful plan so callously disrupted. 3, if you count today. And here he'd been hoping to do some recon on the village, maybe ingratiate himself with the clans, possibly even improve his social standing, the better with which to guide future events. Being sent out as an envoy to another village wasn't exactly part of the plan. It certainly didn't help that he knew next to nothing about Sunagakur, save that Gaara, and by definition, his mother and father, hailed from there. Wasn't her name Karura? Or something? He quietly filled that away for later use before speaking again. I thought I'd have at least a week to acclimate till you started sending me on missions or something important. You've generated a lot of interest in the other nations. Hiruzen replied, steepling his fingers. As much as I would have liked to give you some time, I'm afraid that's no longer an option. Besides, and here the Sandaime did smile, you're still wearing that old, are you not? Naruto blanched, in all the chaos of his arrival, he simply hadn't bothered to remove the damn thing. Sentimental value in wetting it. You have me there. Precisely. The not quite old man answered, his grey gaze gravitating towards Naruto once more. As Sunagakur is our ally, I saw no reason to refuse their request. Unless you have a problem. Inwardly, Naruto blanched. Well, this certainly threw a wrench in his plans. But he couldn't object without sounding foolish, and he'd already resolved not to reveal that he was from the future. To say so now would ruin what little credibility he had already established within the village, not to mention end with him in irons. They'd think he was a crazy man. And with the false memories of the Shinigami overlaying his own, there was no way for him to convince them otherwise. No choice but to bite the bullet on this one. No. I can't say that I do. Naruto pinched the bridge of his nose. I take it you're going to assign me an escort. My pupils will escort you, yes. Sarutobi replied. This isn't a ranked mission, Naruto. As much as I might like to, I can't simply send you alone. He made no mention of the turmoil his obliteration of Fugaku had done to the village, they both knew that a message had been delivered, albeit unintentionally. To stand against Madara's descendant was to court death or worse. It wasn't certain if the man would ever wake from the coma the medics had found him in. For all intents and purposes the man's might just be gone. So it's gonna be just me and the Sannin, pawing around in the desert. Came the reply. Phew. Naruto. The reborn Uchiha stopped short, humor falling to the wayside when heard that tone. The tone. It was the same one the old man had used to discipline him when he was 6 years old. Whatever he was about to say, it was completely, utterly serious. I suspect you already know this yourself, but I should let you know that we are at war amongst the other major villages. Assassinations, power-changing hands, that sort of thing is commonplace in this day and era. Saratobi warned, his voice dreadfully soft. Iwa, Kumo, Kiri. Amongst others. I would greatly appreciate your discretion in this matter. Although it seems like a trifling task for one such as yourself, I needn't remind you that the probability of encountering resistance is quite high. Afraid I'm going to burn a few bodies. Unless you've business with the claimed heiress. Here is encountered slyly. Naruto froze. Saratobi knew. He didn't know how, but somehow, the old man knew. He knew. He'd managed to land himself in trouble already. It didn't have anything to do with his afternoon tryst with Mikoto, thank Kami, save the Sandame and his crystal Baldum ball. The two of them had managed to avoid detection, despite having blatant sex in the middle of the afternoon in an unguarded training ground no less. The Uchiha heiress had bid him adieu with a not-so-subtle promise to see him later. Thus, here he found himself, dancing on a razor's edge. To deny it would make him look bad in the eyes of the Uchiha, not to mention Mikoto herself, whom he rather fancied, and likely eliminate the one ally he'd already gained. Preventing that massive massacre was high on his to-do list, enough to make the former blonde swallow his pride and relinquish the fact. How? It was not a question. I have my ways. Saratobi's smile was that of a proud parent. Once more Naruto was reminded that the old man considered much of Konoha to be his family. At Naruto's thunderous expression he was swift to raise his hands in deference. Make no mistake, I approve. It is good that you were able to integrate into your clan so seamlessly. Naruto's anger dissolved when he saw that amused expression. Replaced by shock. The old fart had actually seen it happen. And try as he might, he simply couldn't bring himself to be angry about it. In doing so, Saratobi literally had him over a barrel. That ingenious bastard. A knock on the door interrupted his self-inflicted musings. Yes, come in. Saratobi waved. Once more Naruto found himself stricken speechless by the trio that emerged. Tsunade he'd already seen, so her reappearance wasn't nearly as striking as before. But there's not a pace behind her. Arisenin. He was a bit younger, without the lines in his face, but it was definitely him. He was alive. Almost every fiber of Naruto's being longed to leap across the room and gloom his sensei in a strong hug. That desire only intensified when Jiraiya grinned that cocky grin of his and spoke. You called for us, old man. I'm not that old. Saratobi's reaction had Naruto snickering, but his amusement was admittedly short-lived. Because there was one other whom he'd failed to account for. One who just as swiftly made himself known, that oily slippery olive voice sending a sharp spike of anger. Fear through the warm fog of nostalgic euphoria that had enveloped him. Is this him, sensei? Yes, this is the young man I spoke to you about. Interesting. The Uchiha's Sharingan activated almost on their own, and he simultaneously fought down the urge to hiss as that golden gaze fell upon him. There he was. Naruto felt a cold chill shoot down his spine at the sight of Orochimaru, nearly grimacing at Sanin's pale, compassed visage. Orochimaru had been somewhat ambivalent toward by the time war reached its climax. He had even worked together once or twice a bit. He trusted the slippery snake about as far as he could throw Gamabunta. Which was about a foot or two. The man might not be evil yet might that didn't make him any less dangerous. If anything, he was even more of a threat. Their brief alliance against Obito and Madara hadn't gone altogether well, ending with the Sanin's eventual death and Naruto's forced use of the Shinigami seal on Madara. Now here he was, starting. Now that he was in Uchiha he'd no doubt whatsoever that the man would try and go after his eyes. Kukikuku, why so serious? Orochimaru asked, laughing genially at the sight of the Sharingan and killer intent. I mean you no harm. Lies. Murderer. Betrayer. Oathbreaker. Naruto's left eye twitched, dangerously close to ending the man with one of his newly acquired techniques. It would be so easy. Madara's eyes had revealed to him a great many jutsu. It made his own Rasengan and Rasen Shuriken variants, a tiny drop in a very large ocean. An ocean he could now peer into at any time and summon forth almost any jutsu he wished. He could drown the man in water, bury him in mud, char his body to cinders, or even suffocate the air from his lungs. And those were just the elemental ones. Of course, any such aggression would result in an immediate attack from the three shinobi in the room, but still. I need to find a way to get rid of this guy without anyone noticing. An idea occurred to him just then. Orochimaru would be suffering a very unfortunate accident a few days from now. But until then. He would play nice. Sorry, he cracked, but I don't like guys. He had the sweet satisfaction of watching the man's pale visage turn ghost white. Tsunade frowned at the slight, opened her mouth to speak. Oh, calm down, Grandma. Naruto waved her wrath away at a glance, quietly cursing himself for the slip-up. Let your boyfriend over there fight his own battles. Now, 2/3 of them were paler than bone itself. Why you little we are not involved. At all. Ahahahahaha. Jiraiya's mad cackle lopped the legs off her reprimand with singular ease, the white head all but beside himself with laughter. Oh, that was a good one. I like this guy. He readily extended an arm toward Naruto, offering a rough palm for the younger man to clasp with a familiar ease. Nice Tomicha, kid. I'm Jiraiya. Hope we can get along. Same. He managed, shaking the hand of the man who would one day teach him so much, he couldn't resist getting a jibe in. Just be thankful I don't have a stick up my ass like the rest of my clan. His grin only grew as they shook. I'd heard it from Sarutobi, but you're really not like most Uchiha, are ya? Nope. Naruto bit back a smile, seizing upon the chance to get to better know the man who had once taught him so much. Must be my perverted streak. A lie, technically. He hadn't discovered those urges until just before Sakura's death and shortly thereafter his own, but they'd set in firmly enough to make him wonder sometimes, had the legendary sage really rubbed off on him that badly? Hell, he'd even caught himself peeping a time or two. Then he'd found himself flung into the past and summarily Mikoto had stirred up those desires all over again. A gleam shone in the Sanin's eye. Is that so? You have no idea. Good to see you're getting along. Sarutobi smiled. You know your assignment, the four of you will leave for the border and make for Sunagakure immediately. I pray you succeed. A wave of the wrist summoned up a quartet of packs and another tossed them at them, others in even fashion. Naruto wasted absolutely no time in checking the supplies, a cloak, canteens and interestingly enough in his case, a small tanto. A glance at the Sandae merely confirmed his suspicions. Consider this your first official mission as a Konoha shinobi. The man replied. Do well, and I can guarantee you the rank of Jonin upon your return. Unless you'd rather join the Anbu. No. Naruto hastily replied, grimacing at the mention of the Black Ops. That summoned up another memory. Root. He'd have to weed them out in Danzo as well, lest their despicable deeds poison the whole of Konoha as they had during his time. Jonin is just fine. I won't let you down. Unsheathing the blade he marveled at its caliber. It almost reminded him of the weapon the legendary White Fang had wielded. Only its edge was pure obsidian, blacker than the night itself. Right. Kakashi's old man was still around. Best to address that soon too, before the man ended up committing seppuku. Well, you're certainly eager, I'll give you that. Jiraiya mused before returning his attention to their leader. You can count on us, old man, if worst comes to worst. And it won't. Naruto added primly. That will take care of him. Tsunade finished, earning a frown from Jiraiya. Like he said, we won't let you down. See that you don't. Steepling his fingers, the aging Kage leaned forward to address the four of them. I cannot stress how important this is to the war effort. If our allies falter, then so too do we. I needn't remind you that we rely almost entirely upon Suna for weapons now, do I? The tanto you're holding now, Naruto, is a gift from their finest blacksmiths. A small smile tugged upwards at his lips. They thought you might need some encouragement to venture out of the village. It is yours to keep. So villages are willing to bribe me to get my attention, eh? Naruto mused as he gave his new toy a test swing, silently filing away this tidbit for later. Not that he'd ever betray Konoha, but a weapon like this would come in handy down the road. Madara had been known to the entire world and thus the appearance of his descendant was naturally not a well-kept secret. It was no small surprise that others would try to seduce him away from his home, but if a paltry weapon was all they had to offer, dismissed. Yes sir. Tsunade and Orochimaru saluted, Naruto's lackadaisical stance drawing looks of ire from them both as they departed. No funny business this time, Tsunade warned with a growl almost before they even exited the office. I'm not in the mood for it. Naruto headed to the side, the universal way to go, huh? But the Kunoichi only flushed ever darker, her eyes bright with anger. Says the girl who got knocked on her ass. The Sanin's face brightened with embarrassment. Jiraiya snickered as they strode out into the street. I've never seen someone get under Tsunade's skin like that. I'll kill both of you. So what'd you think of Konoha so far? Jiraiya asked, ignoring his teammates' vehement decree as they made their way through the market district. I mean, you've already taken the tour, but did anything stand out? Unbidden, Naruto recalled a fond memory. Trying to water walk for the first time, encountering a white-haired stranger who claimed to be the great Jiraiya or some such nonsense. Truly, that was the day the title Arasanen was born. A small smile tugged at the edge of his mouth. Well, the hot springs are nice. Jiraiya looked as though he'd just found a long-lost relative in the Uchiha. My brother. Tsunade groaned. If you two idiots are quite done. Hi, Naruto chortled happily. Is there something you'd like to say? An insult perhaps? Or would you like to try and punch me again? We all know how that worked out. The blonde only frowned. The three of us will be taking the lead. She informed him, her gaze straying to Orochimaru and then Jiraiya. You will provide provisional support. After all, we'd never hear the end of it from the Uchiha if we let their precious golden boy get hurt. I can handle myself. Right. Her deadpan was barely concealed. You got lucky the other day, punk. Try something like that again and I'll snap your spine in half. Naruto couldn't help but whistle at that one. Sheesh, are you this violent with Dan? Who in the blue hell is that? Oops. Evidently she hadn't met the love of her life yet. Well. That explains a lot. Better now mention the walkie. Look you little shit, I don't know what kind of games you're trying to play or what you've been up to out there in the boonies, but… Naruto lets those jibes roll off him like water off a duck's back, knowing Tsunade's temper made it all too easy. She might have mellowed out by the time they'd met one another, but in that time, he'd almost forgotten just how vindictive she could be. Dealing with Tsunade as Hokage was one thing. Tolerating the brazen blonde in her actual youth was 10 times worse. On a hunch, it seemed like Tsunade was only telling half the story for being an envoy. Making herself stand apart from their group of 4 showed a more severe side that he thought she lacked as Hokage, but one glance at her told him there seemed to be something more personal than dealing with a few scouts. Naruto threw out one piece of bait, looking to see if the blonde would bite. His father had been right about that much at least. You do not torment the helpless to assert a position of power. That was reprehensible in so many ways. Those who have power, however. Now that was a different story. You wouldn't happen to have something against me, would you, Tsunade-chan? Tsunade's hazel eyes narrowed slightly. There's the bite. Yes, I have something against you. She rounded on him with such ferocity that he almost started. You're new, untested, untrained, and quite frankly I don't trust you. You've already proven your temper, insulted the 2 of us, and you're a pervert like Jiraiya. So no, I don't think we'll be getting along anytime soon. Before the war, Naruto would have flinched if she'd rounded on him like that. Now, he didn't bat an eyelash. Hear that? He grinned at Jiraiya. She thinks we're Kapla perverts. Ha! The Suntab laughed. I am no mere pervert, nor am I. Naruto returned with a grin. That's right, we are. Super perverts. They chorused merrily, slinging an arm around each other's shoulders. There was silence. And then. Let's go, Tsunade. Orochimaru sighed in disgust. Leave the fools to their delusions of grandeur. Hey, no need to be hasty. Naruto swung around to block their path in a simple shunshin. I don't really care about the snake bastard, but if you hate me this much Tsunade-chan, what'd you say to a little wager? You win, and I won't speak to you for the rest of my days. A simple contest, that's all. She paused, torn between ridding herself of the insufferable upstart and wondering what her end of the bargain would be. And if you win? Then you have to at least make an effort to be nice. Naruto challenged, knowing it would grate her nerves to do such a thing. You know what I'm talking about, pleasant and such. At least to get to know me before you start condemning me for sins that aren't mine. Sounds fair. That's it. Naruto replied, knowing she was a legendary sucker. Shall we settle this, then? His foot struck down at the street, molding the earth into the form he so required. The pavement bent to his will, summoning forth a finely packed table of earth and clay and a pair of tiny hills upon. He moved to the nearby table and took his place on the crudely crafted chair beside it, earning a bemused chuckle from Jiraiya and a quiet stare from Orochimaru. Genius that he was, the pale prodigy immediately realized what the Uchiha was up to. And, in his convoluted mind, he thought the Uchiha stood no chance, none at all. Tsunade's strength was legendary, the man was a fool to challenge her. He said as much, and Jiraiya seemed to think so just as well, but he remained silent despite. Arm wrestle? Yup. Unless you're afraid. Naruto taunted. Tell you what, I won't even use my Sharingan. Just brute strength. No 2 out of 3s or anything. You pin me once and I give up, and vice versa. Tsunade bristled. Oi. Is he serious? Quite. Naruto placed his arm on their impromptu little table and wiggled his fingers. Finally, Tsunade did the same. You do realize you're going to lose, right? Wah. The Uchiha laughed as he lit a cigar with one hand and tapped his sheathed tanto with the other, some of the other villagers curious as to what exactly the man was capable of doing. We'll see. Ready, and… go. To her credit, Tsunade actually managed to budge him an inch or 2. But Naruto already knew all her tells, just as he knew he had exactly 3 seconds to force that arm down before she snapped him in half. He was by no means stronger than Tsunade, but a year's worth of war had taught him to be clever. And so, before she could exert the full force of her considerable might, he swung out with his foot breaking her concentration just long enough all without so much as touching her. In that instant her grip instinctively slackened as she prepared to defend herself, and he put his superior speed to use. Slam. Jiraiya and Orochimaru gasped as the back of Tsunade's arm struck the table with enough force to shatter it, leaving the smug Uchiha the proud victor. There was silence. And then. A glimmer of respect entered her eye. You. Bastard. But the words were without their usual rancor. How did you know that would work? Naruto waggled his eyebrows. A ninja must look beneath the Tsunade-chan. And in doing so, he just so happened to catch a streak of red amidst the crowd. Well now, he muttered, creating a shadow clone to pursue. What do we have here? Kushina was dejected. Nearly 3 days had passed since she'd seen Naruto. After the Uchiha had been whisked away, Kami knew where she'd heard precious little. Apparently he was the talk of the town, having nigh but easily maimed a fellow Uchiha in a duel of honor. That came as no surprise to her, having seen the man's techniques firsthand she knew he was more than a match for most shinobi. But where had he gone? Surely he hadn't gotten himself thrown out of the village for his actions. If so, she would have at least liked to say goodbye. When asked, Minato had expressed some relief that the newcomer had vanished, stating that strangers like him couldn't be trusted during times of war. Kushina was certain there was more to the blonde's sudden animosity than that, but she'd been shooed away before she could press the matter any further. Evidently the last Namikaze was hard at work on a new jutsu and he didn't want anyone to lay eyes upon it until it had been completed. That left her search at a dead end. Almost. Rumor had it that the Uchiha were preening him as a prime candidate for the next clan head, a position Naruto had ardently refused. Not every useful information, but important nonetheless. Beyond that she hadn't heard anything more about him. Supposedly he was the long-lost descendant of Uchiha Madara, a genius prodigy whose skill was unmatched. She'd tried asking Mikoto about it, but her friend had been awfully secretive about it. Now that she was on a mission to Kamiknaware, she had no way of asking her bestie about it any more than she could Naruto himself. So here she was confined to the village walls in no small part thanks to Kumo's kidnapping attempt, left to ponder what had become of her savior. Naturally she'd been drawn by the crowds to the marketplace, where some event or some such had just taken place. Dang it. She'd just missed them. Someone claimed the legendary Tsunade had been beaten in an arm wrestling contest. By some wisecracking Uchiha no less. There was no doubt in her mind who that could be, it must have been Naruto. Darn it, she'd just missed him. Cursing herself for her slowness she kicked at a patch of dirt and started back the way she came. Completely unaware of the shadow she'd picked up. That was when she heard the voice. "Boy, Kushina-chan." The young Redeed started at the mention of her name, alerted by the bemused dulcet tones behind that voice. Her body whirled so fast she actually kicked up a small cloud of dust, bright eyes over large and white as they beheld the one who had spoken. "Naruto. Yo." Uchiha raised a hand in a lazy greeting as he reached her. "I was looking for you." Every fiber of her being longed to swarm him, she only barely held herself in check. That was when she noticed his attire. The raven-haired man had outfitted himself for a long journey, a clear sign that he intended to travel great distances, and soon. Oh no. Had he truly been exiled for his actions already? Not to press you or anything, but are you? Am I? Please don't leave already, Databane. Naruto blinked, momentarily taken aback by those words. Kushina felt her face flare fire engine red, the back of her neck burning beneath the brand of his inquisitive gaze. There. She'd said it. An awful pall hung there between them for a long moment, the silence stretching on for what felt like a small eternity. Finally someone broke it. "Leave," Naruto exclaimed aghast, his composure shattering like so much glass. "What are you talking about? I've just been assigned a mission, that's all." He continued quietly, indicating his pack. "It's a big one, too. Real hush-hush kinda stuff. Don't know when I'll be back." Oh. Relief flooded her every feature. He wasn't leaving. Well, he was, but at least he'd be coming back. Unless he got killed. But then if he got killed wouldn't he be? Arg, why is this so hard? Groaning, the Redeed buried her face in both hands, Tringan Felinto stifled the moan that moved past her muffled lips. "There's an old saying where I'm from," Naruto grinned. "Even when a lion hunts a rabbit, he gives it his all. That's the kind of man I am. So even on a mission like this, I'm prepared to go all out." Were you worried about me? Ass. Kushina couldn't help but smile at his attempt at levity. Despite that, Naruto frowned. "I'll be fine." He reassured, mistaking her silence for anger. "No, it's not that, it's just." Now it all made sense. She still felt indebted to him for saving her 3 days before. It was only natural that she'd want to learn more about him and, ordinarily, he would have had a problem with that. The only problem was this was his. Well, mother. Granted, he may or may not exist as in Uzumaki anymore and his old self had yet to be born. But still. He was going to have to overcome that mindset if he planned to speak with her, let alone form any sort of friendship. Gods, why oh why was this so difficult? She wasn't even his mother anymore. Sorta. Kinda. Maybe. Something like that. I'm nothing special. Don't talk like that. Naruto shook his head. You're a hero of the village, after all. Kushina flushed. A hero? What makes you say that? Because you're holding back Kyuubi, preventing him from escaping. Naruto's deadpan was barely concealed. Isn't that obvious? Why should anyone mistreat you for your sacrifice? I certainly won't. If you didn't take him into your own body, this entire village might not even exist anymore. In my eyes, that makes you a hero. Reaching down for her, he cupped her chin in hand, forcing the young Kunoichi to look him square in the eye. No matter what anyone says, that's what you are. You, Uzumaki Kushina, are a hero. There was silence. Slowly her face began to flush, not scarlet as before, but a rosy hue. almost as if she'd been tickled pink. I thought you're really trying to make me fall for you, aren't you? The kiss, when it came, was completely and totally unexpected. One moment he'd been standing there, staring down at the girl without his continued interference might one day be his mother. The next, she stood on the tips of her toes and pressed her lips against his whiskered cheek. It was a fleeting, tantalizing touch, innocent and naive. And it had him completely spellbound. So surprised was the shadow clone that it actually dispelled on contact, evaporating less than an instant after Kashina's lips touched his cheek. The young vixen left behind was baffled, blinking in surprise as she realized the object of her affections had just vanished in a plume of smoke. She'd kissed a cage bunchen. But even so. She had actually. Completely. Definitely. Kissed. Him. Oh dear. The actual Naruto blinked as the memories came back to him at the gate. Well, that was certainly. Interesting. A small, slightly dismayed smile leapt to his lips. He'd been kissed. Asked. By his own mother. And to make matters worse, he'd actually enjoyed it.